Portland's sodium streetlights cast everything in shades of amber and ash. Isla Thornton counted the bills one final time, her fingers numb despite the September warmth that still clung to the night air. $43.15. 15 months of waitressing shifts, every tip dollar hoarded in an old jewelry box that once held her mother's wedding ring, now reduced to 2 20s and 3 1s crumpled against her palm. The arithmetic spun through her mind with the precision her engineering degree had drilled into her. Motel 6 would take 38 for 2 nights leave, 5 for food, then homelessness in 72 hours. Or she could buy 2 Greyhound tickets to Bend for 28 total, gamble the remaining 15 on a taxi to a house she'd only seen once at age 10, a structure likely condemned by now, probably not even standing. Wren's weight pressed against her hip. 5 years old and silent in that way children get when the world stops making sense, when the adults around them move with jerky urgency and speak in clipped sentences that don't explain anything. 3 garbage bags slouched against the fire hydrant behind them, holding everything they owned. The phone in Isla's jacket showed 22% battery, no charger, no plan beyond the calculations spinning through her head like load-bearing equations that refused to balance. The Brennan family home sat dark behind them, windows blank. The porch light Vivian had left burning for 18 months now extinguished. Isla had watched it click off from the corner 5 minutes ago, understanding perfectly. The light had never been for her anyway. It had been a performance of generosity, a visible marker of charity extended, and now that charity had expired. The darkness felt deliberate, a message readable from the street. Wren's voice came small and careful, already learning not to ask too much. "When do we go inside?" The question landed like a fist in Isla's ribs. She knelt on the sidewalk eye level with her daughter, searching for words that wouldn't be lies. Her hands found Wren's shoulders, felt the small bones beneath the jacket Marin Crawford had given them last week when the temperature started dropping at night. "We're going on an adventure to see Mommy's grandfather's old house in the mountains. Is Grandma Vivian coming?" "No, sweetheart. Just us." Wren's fingers tightened in Isla's hair, the tell that meant she understood more than she should. At 5, she'd already learned the language of abandonment, the grammar of doors closing, the syntax of adults who stopped meeting your eyes when they told you everything would be fine. 18 months earlier, Isla had been a structural engineer pulling $72,000 a year. Cole Brennan's wife, a woman with a retirement account and a coffee maker that ground beans fresh each morning. Then Cole's heart had stopped during mile 18 of the Portland Marathon. 32 years old, gone before the EMTs got his shirt open, before Isla even knew he'd collapsed, before the world finished tilting on its axis and dumping her into this new gravity where nothing held its proper weight. The memorial service had filled Providence Park Chapel to capacity. Vivian Brennan had held Isla's hand through the eulogy, whispered that family takes care of family, that Isla and Wren would always have a home. The words had felt like a life raft in dark water. Isla had clung to them, believed them, reorganized her entire existence around their promise. The company terminated her position 11 weeks later. Budget cuts, they said, though Isla had watched them hire her replacement within a month. A man without a grieving widow's tendency to stare at spreadsheets without seeing numbers, without the habit of forgetting which project she was reviewing because Cole's face kept surfacing in her mind at random moments, pulling her under. Cole's life insurance sat frozen in probate. Vivian's lawyer arguing that the $50,000 should fund a trust for Wren with family oversight. Family oversight meant Vivian's oversight meant Isla had no access to money. Her dead husband had meant for emergencies exactly like this one. The lawyer's letters arrived weekly, each one thicker than the last, each one costing money Isla didn't have to refute. Her savings lasted through January. February brought the eviction notice from the apartment they could no longer afford. March brought Vivian's invitation delivered with a tight smile and an unspoken price tag Isla wouldn't understand until much later. The first 6 months had felt like rescue. Isla contributed $800 monthly from her waitressing income at Frank's Diner, the only place that would hire someone whose references included a termination and whose availability included a 5-year-old who sometimes got sick at daycare. She cooked dinner for the household, kept Wren quiet during Vivian's afternoon bridge games, with women whose jewelry could have paid Isla's rent for a year. She cleaned bathrooms and did laundry and pretended not to notice the way Vivian's friends looked at her, their eyes skating over her stained uniform and landing on Wren with a pity that felt like acid. Knox Brennan Cole's older brother had seemed almost kind in those early weeks. 40 years old, with an accountant's careful demeanor, asking after Wren's adjustment to kindergarten, offering to help Isla update her resume. Sloane Cole's younger sister stayed distant but civil. Isla told herself they were all navigating the same grief, that time would smooth the rough edges into something resembling family. Month 7 brought Knox's job loss. His accounting firm downsized in a merger, and suddenly the house felt smaller. His comments sharpened at dinner, observations about grocery bills and utility costs, suggestions that Isla might find full-time work, as if 60-hour weeks slinging hash wasn't full enough. Isla started eating smaller portions, skipping meals, telling herself she wasn't hungry when the chicken ran out before everyone had seconds. Sloane's divorce finalized in month 9. She moved back into her childhood bedroom with suitcases full of bitterness and a lawyer's letter demanding Cole's life insurance be split among all the Brennans. The logic twisted Isla's brain into knots. Wren was Vivian's granddaughter. Therefore, family assets should benefit everyone equally. As if Wren weren't also Isla's daughter. As if the money Cole had paid premiums on for 8 years belonged to people who'd barely spoken to him in the year before he died. By month 13, Isla was paying $1,000 in rent. The number had crept up in $100 increments, each increase accompanied by Vivian's careful explanation about rising costs, about fairness, about the value of the room they occupied. Isla worked split shifts at Frank's and a late-night Mexican place, sleeping 4 hours between jobs, while Wren learned to entertain herself in the small bedroom they shared. The girl built elaborate cities from blocks, held conversations with stuffed animals, never complained. The silence felt worse than tears. Vivian's tone had shifted from sympathetic to administrative, a landlord managing a tenant who'd overstayed goodwill. Knox started calling Isla's work ethic into question, pointing out that she'd had career options before getting comfortable living off Brennan generosity. The phrase made Isla's teeth ache. She was working 16-hour days and still couldn't afford to leave, couldn't save enough for first and last month's rent on a studio apartment, couldn't escape the trap that looked like kindness from the outside. Sloane made comments about women who married for security and then played victim when circumstances changed. The words slid under Isla's skin like splinters, small and sharp and impossible to extract. She'd met Cole at an engineering conference, had fallen in love with his quiet humor and the way he listened when she talked about load distribution patterns in bridge design. The suggestion that she'd calculated his net worth before saying yes to dinner made her want to scream. The final 3 months were a slow-motion car crash Isla couldn't stop watching. Vivian demanded Isla take over, care for her father, an 86-year-old man with advancing dementia who needed help bathing, dressing, eating. Isla added healthcare to her resume, told herself this was what family did, ignored the way Knox and Sloane had mysteriously become too busy for their own grandfather. The old man called her Eleanor, sometimes confused her with someone from his past, asked about the mine and whether Samuel had sent the papers yet. The insurance money remained frozen. Vivian's lawyer filing motion after motion, while Isla's free legal aid attorney struggled to keep up with paperwork. Every cent Isla earned went to rent, food, Wren's school supplies. She stashed $20 weekly in the jewelry box, dreaming of first and last month's rent on a studio somewhere far from the Brennan house, far from Portland, far from the smell of Vivian's disappointment every time Isla walked through a door. September 15th. Her shift at the Mexican restaurant ran late. A bachelor party that closed the bar and left her cleaning salsa off the ceiling at 1 in the morning. She missed the last bus, walked 40 minutes home in her grease-stained uniform, arrived at 6:20 instead of 6. The garbage bag sat on the porch like accusations, carefully packed, zipped closed. Vivian blocked the doorway, and her bathrobe face set in that expression Isla had learned to recognize. The look that meant decisions had been made and arguments wouldn't be entertained. This needs to end. 18 months is more than generous. Isla's exhaustion made everything feel distant, like watching herself through gauze. I pay rent. I work. I take care of your father. What am I not doing? Knox appeared behind Vivian, arms crossed righteous in his certainty. You have $50,000 in insurance that legally belongs to Wren, our niece. That money should benefit the whole family, not get hoarded for your own use. The absurdity might have been funny if Isla weren't so tired. The money's frozen. Your mother's lawyer froze it. I haven't seen a cent. Sloane materialized from the kitchen, joining the tribunal with her arms wrapped around herself like armor. You knew what you were doing when you married Cole. Found a successful family, played the grieving widow, took everything you could. The accusation was so grotesque, Isla almost laughed. Instead, she looked at Vivian, searched for some remnant of the woman who'd held her hand at the funeral, who'd promised that family takes care of family. Is this really what you think? That I married your son for money? That I'm using Wren as leverage? Vivian's face stayed carved from stone. What I think is that you've been here long enough. Wren can stay. You need to figure out your own situation. The offer to split a mother from her daughter snapped Isla's spine straight. She bent, lifted the nearest garbage bag, felt something tear inside her that wasn't physical. Some last thread of trust in human decency, some final belief that surely no one would actually suggest taking a 5-year-old from her mother, finally severed clean. Wren comes with me. We'll be fine. She collected her daughter from the TV room where she'd been watching cartoons, oblivious to the dismantling of her life, happening 2 rooms away. Walked out the door without looking back. Made it to the corner before her knees tried to buckle, before the full weight of what had just happened crashed through the adrenaline, keeping her upright. Now she knelt on the curb under dying streetlights, counting money that wouldn't save them. The Greyhound station smelled like diesel and desperation. When they finally pushed through the doors an hour later, Isla hauling garbage bags while Wren clung to her jacket. Fluorescent lights turned everyone's skin gray, made the waiting area look like a hospital corridor after visiting hours. Isla bought 2 tickets to Bend with 3 of her last dollars, the booth agent barely glancing up from her phone. The bus wouldn't leave for another hour. She found a bench, pulled Wren onto her lap, tried to remember everything she knew about Beckett Thornton's house. Her grandfather had died when she was 13 back in 2009. The house sat on Old Cascade Road outside Bend, high desert country pine forest and volcanic soil. Her mother had inherited the property but never visited, paying minimal property taxes out of habit until she died in 2010, leaving everything to Isla in a will so simple it fit on 1 page. Isla had driven out once during her sophomore year of college, curious about family history, found the place abandoned and slightly sinister in the way of empty houses, decided it wasn't worth the cost of maintenance, and forgotten about it until tonight. She pulled up Google Maps on her dying phone, found the pin she'd saved years ago. The satellite view showed a gray roof amid thick trees, no neighboring structures visible. Property records listed it as uninhabitable, recommended for demolition. Tax bills sat unpaid for 2 years, accumulating penalties Isla couldn't afford but would have to figure out. The numbers swam in her vision. She closed her eyes, felt Wren's breath against her neck, warm and trusting. The memory surfaced without permission. She'd been 10 visiting Bend during a rare summer trip her mother had organized, found Beckett in his study surrounded by papers, maps spread across every surface, pencil markings and elevation numbers scattered across topographical surveys. He'd looked up when she knocked, smiled with a warmth that made her brave enough to ask what he was doing. Come see something interesting. He'd shown her maps of Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, places marked with pencil notations she couldn't decode. His hands, calloused and scarred from decades of fieldwork, traced routes along mountain ranges. Your great-great-grandfather panned for gold in these mountains back in the 1890s. Found enough to buy a farm, raise a family. I've been looking for the veins he missed, the big deposits the old-timers couldn't reach. Did you find any? His smile had turned sad, the expression of someone who'd spent a lifetime chasing something just beyond reach. That's the question, isn't it? Finding gold is easy. Finding enough gold, getting it out of the ground, making it pay. That's the hard part. Then he'd said something Isla hadn't understood until tonight, hadn't remembered until desperation made her ready to hear it. This house has secrets, Isla. If you ever need them, really need them, remember this. Look where the storm reveals what time hides. Don't look until you're ready. Don't look until you're desperate. Only desperate people are humble enough to see what's actually there instead of what they want to find. She'd thought it was a riddle, an old man's cryptic wisdom. Now, watching pines blur past in the darkness as the bus climbed into the Cascade foothills, Isla wondered if desperation had finally made her ready. Wren slept curled in the window seat while Isla stared at her reflection in the dark glass, trying to recognize herself. She'd been a structural engineer once, before coal, before marriage, before grief taught her that stability was an illusion you paid monthly premiums to maintain. Bridges had made sense. Steel and concrete, following predictable rules, load calculations and stress analysis problems with definite solutions. People followed no such patterns. The Brennan family had seemed solid, supportive until the day they weren't. Money had seemed secure until it vanished. Isla had believed in foundations, and now she was riding a bus toward a house that might not have walls, let alone welcome. The Bend station was empty at 11 at night. Just a covered bench in a parking lot under sodium lights that buzzed and flickered. Isla used 15 of her last $18 to call a taxi, gave the driver an address that made him frown. That's way out. Old Cascade Road. You sure nothing out there but woods and abandoned places? She showed him the remaining bills. This is what I have. Can you get us there? He looked at Wren sleeping on Isla's shoulder, made a decision that might have been kindness or might have been pity. Either way, Isla would take it. Yeah. Okay. The drive took 25 minutes through increasingly rural darkness, streetlights giving way to tunnel vision between headlight beams, pavement degrading to gravel, gravel to dirt. The road narrowed until branches scraped the taxi's sides, painting thin scratches across the windows. Finally, the driver stopped where the track became impassable. Can't go further. Road's washed out. You're maybe a quarter mile from whatever you're looking for. Isla paid him everything left except $3. Lifted Wren carefully shouldered 2 garbage bags, dragged the third. The taxi's taillights vanished, leaving them in darkness so complete, Isla's engineer brain immediately calculated the astronomical twilight estimated moon phase, concluded visibility at less than 20 feet. She turned on her phone's flashlight, watched the battery percentage drop to 18, started walking. The house emerged from trees like something from a nightmare. Listing slightly to the north wraparound porch, sagging in the middle windows, either boarded or broken. Isla played light across the structure, forcing herself into assessment mode instead of panic. The foundation was poured concrete, 1950s construction, showing cracks but no catastrophic failure. The framing appeared to be post and beam solid timber that would take decades to rot through completely. The roof was metal rusted but still covering most of the structure. Porch steps had rotted through and places would need careful navigation. Overall, structural integrity marginal but standing. Not ideal, not safe by any code, but not immediately lethal. The engineer in her cataloged problems, while the terrified mother screamed that she was bringing her daughter into a derelict building in the middle of nowhere with $3 and a phone, about to die. She tested the front door, found it locked, put her shoulder into the frame. Wood around the lock plate crumbled like wet cardboard. The door swung inward on shrieking hinges that announced their arrival to every mouse and spider inside. The smell hit her first. Mold mouse droppings. Decades of decay compressed into one olfactory assault that made her eyes water. She swept the flashlight beam across a living room frozen in time. Furniture draped in sheets gray with dust. A stone fireplace that might still draw. A wood stove that looked ancient but intact. And against one wall, impossibly, a stack of firewood that had somehow stayed dry through 15 years of abandonment. The discovery felt like a miracle or a sign, or maybe just dumb luck. Isla didn't care which. She settled Wren on an old couch that released clouds of dust but didn't collapse, then spent 2 hours clearing enough space to be survivable. The wood stove's flue was blocked by a bird's nest but otherwise functional. The firewood was seasoned pine left over from whenever Beckett had last lived here, dry enough to burn. Isla had never started a fire in her life, had grown up with central heating and programmable thermostats. She tried 8 times, wasting precious matches before finally coaxing flames from newspaper and kindling. Heat radiated out, pushed back. The September chill made the room feel marginally less like a tomb. Upstairs she found a cedar chest full of blankets that smelled like mothballs but were intact. She shook them out, created a nest near the stove, laid Wren down wrapped in layers. Her daughter was asleep before Isla finished tucking Edge's Trust Absolute in the way only children could manage. Only then did Isla let herself feel the full weight of where they were. Homeless with $3 to their name, no power, no running water, in a structure that might not survive its next windstorm. The fire popped, sent sparks swirling up the flue. Isla watched embers dance and tried to remember the last time she'd felt safe. Not in the Brennan house, that was certain. Maybe before Cole died, though even that memory felt suspect, now colored by everything that came after. Perhaps safety was always an illusion, a story people told themselves while standing on ground that could open up and swallow them without warning. Dawn came gray and cold. Isla woke stiff, every muscle complaining about the wood floor beneath her makeshift bed. Wren still slept, face peaceful, trusting. Isla stood carefully moved to the windows, assessed her situation in daylight. The house looked worse than midnight had suggested. Exterior walls showing rot in the corners. Foundation plants grown wild enough to be small trees, the yard a jungle of weeds and volunteer saplings. But the bones were good. Isla could see it in the way the structure held its shape, the quality of the timber framing visible through holes in the siding. Someone had built this house to last, using materials and methods from an era when construction meant something beyond minimum code compliance. The realization steadied her. She understood buildings could read their language, knew how to distinguish between cosmetic damage and structural failure. She explored systematically, cataloging problems and solutions. The well pump outside was hand-cranked, handle broken, but potentially fixable. The bathroom had a composting toilet, long since composted to nothing, would need replacement or a bucket system. The kitchen showed evidence of mice, but no structural damage. The pantry held shelves of canned goods, most rusted or swollen with botulism, though 4 cans of beans looked intact. Dates stamped 1995 but sealed properly, no bulging or leakage. 4 cans meant 2 days of food if they stretched it. After that, Isla would need solutions she didn't have yet. Wren woke asking for breakfast. Isla opened a can of beans, heated it over the wood stove in a pan she'd scrubbed with well water, served it on paper plates from a package that had survived decades. They ate sitting on the porch steps in weak sunlight, Wren chattering about the adventure, Isla calculating how to transform survival into something resembling life. The walk into town took 90 minutes, Isla carrying Wren for the last half when small legs gave out. Ben's Main Street felt like stepping back in time. Local businesses and family restaurants, a hardware store with hand-lettered signs, a diner called Frank's that smelled like coffee and bacon grease. The coincidence of the name hit her hard enough to make her pause. Frank's Diner in Portland. Frank's Diner in Bend. Maybe it was a sign. Maybe she was just desperate enough to see patterns in random chance. She pushed through the door. Wren on her hip approached the counter where a man with gray hair and a stained apron was pouring coffee. "Help you, I need to buy some parts. Hand pump repair kit if you have it." "For what kind of pump?" "Old well pump. 1950s, maybe 60s, out on Old Cascade Road." The man's eyebrows lifted. "Old Cascade? That's nothing but abandoned properties out there. You staying somewhere? The Mitchell place. Beckett Thornton's old house." A voice spoke from behind her, male, aged, surprised. "Beckett Thornton. You're talking about the geologist." Isla turned. An older man sat in a booth somewhere past 70, wearing work clothes and carpenter's hands. His face showed weathering from decades outdoors, his eyes sharp and assessing in a way that suggested he missed very little. "You knew him." "Knew him. I lived down the road from him for 40 years. Silas Crawford. I did some carpentry work for Beckett back in the 70s and 80s. Haven't heard that name in years." He paused, studied Isla's face with an intensity that made her self-conscious about her stained jacket and the exhaustion she could feel written across her features. "You're not. You can't be. Sarah's granddaughter, Linda's daughter, actually. Isla Thornton. My mother was Linda. Silas stood slowly, moved closer like he was seeing a ghost. Linda's girl. Good Lord. I remember when you were small, visiting summers. You'd have been, what, 10, 12, 10, last time I was here. And now you're... He paused, and in that pause Isla saw him taking in everything. Her stained clothes. Wren's too thin frame, the desperate edge she couldn't quite hide. What brings you out here? That house has been empty since Beckett died in '09. The careful walls Isla had built threatened to crack. She kept her voice level through sheer force of will. I needed a place to stay. The house is mine. I inherited it when my mother passed. Silas's expression shifted, understanding, filling in details Isla hadn't spoken. You're living there, with a child. That place isn't safe. No power, no water. Structure's been neglected for 15 years. It has a roof, 4 walls. That's more than I had yesterday. The statement hung in the air, containing volumes. Silas looked at Isla for a long moment, reading the exhaustion, the pride, the desperation being held together by pure will. The well pump is fixable. I can do it. No charge. Beckett helped me out of a jam back in '82. Never let me pay him back. Figure I still owe him. Isla's throat tightened. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm offering. I'll come by tomorrow. Bring tools. Get that pump working. He gestured to the man behind the counter. Frank, you still looking for breakfast shift help? Frank, the diner owner, assessed Isla with a practiced eye. You have waitressing experience, 18 months. 2 different places in Portland. Can you start Monday? 7 to 3, 5 days a week. 11 an hour plus tips. Tips are decent. Breakfast crowd likes to take care of servers. Something loosened in Isla's chest, some knot she'd been holding since the porch light went dark. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. The next 3 weeks blurred together in exhaustion and incremental progress. Silas appeared the day after their meeting, spent 3 hours fixing the well pump, left behind a box of canned goods and a space heater for Wren's room that ran off a car battery and inverter. True to his word, he refused payment, said he'd be back to help with other repairs, told Isla to call if she needed anything. Frank's diner became Isla's anchor. 7-hour shifts that left her feet swollen but brought home $200 to $300 weekly between wages and tips. She paid $50 monthly toward the property tax debt, kept the rest for food, saved $20 a week in the old jewelry box building toward emergencies she knew would come. Wren started at Bend Elementary, caught the school bus at the end of their dirt road each morning, came home with stories about new friends and art projects. Isla avoided explaining why they lived in a house with 1 working room, why they used a bucket for a bathroom, why dinner was often beans and rice. Children adapted better than adults to circumstances that had no good explanation. Silas became a regular presence, showing up weekends with materials and expertise. He patched the roof, replaced rotted porch boards, installed proper wiring for lights in the main rooms, taught Isla basic carpentry while they worked side by side. He never asked why she'd come to Bend, never commented on their circumstances beyond practical observations about what needed fixing. His wife Maren brought over casseroles, hand-me-down clothes for Wren, a bag of books and toys her grandchildren had outgrown. The help felt genuine, unsentimental, the kind of assistance people offered when they'd been poor themselves and remembered. November brought rain that hammered the metal roof like percussion. Wind that tested every seam and joint, temperatures that dropped into the 20s at night. Silas called on the 15th, voice serious. Isla Weather Service is predicting a major storm system moving in. Arctic front mixing with Pacific moisture. Heavy rain, high winds, possible flooding. You should think about coming into town, staying with Maren and me until it passes. Isla looked around the house they'd worked so hard to make livable. We'll be okay. You fixed the roof. The walls are solid. We have firewood and food. Isla. His voice held a weight she hadn't heard before. I've lived here 45 years. I know these storms. They're not like Portland weather. Out where you are, no neighbors, no quick help if something goes wrong. Beckett's house is old. It's held up so far, but a storm like they're predicting. I appreciate the concern, but we're staying. I promise we'll be careful. Silas sighed, resigned. All right, but you have my number. Anything happens, anything at all, you call. I don't care if it's 3 in the morning. The storm arrived November 19th at dusk, announcing itself with wind that bent the pines horizontal and rain that turned the world gray. Isla fed Wren an early dinner, built up the fire in the wood stove, laid out flashlights and blankets. By 9 the wind was screaming, finding every gap in the structure, making the whole house creak and groan. Trees cracked outside with sounds like rifle shots. Rain drummed the roof so hard, Isla had to shout for Wren to hear her. They huddled together in the living room, Isla reading aloud from a library book, pretending this was an adventure and not a test of whether the house would hold. Wren fell asleep around 10, exhausted by fear and eventual boredom. Isla sat watching shadows cast by the wood stove, listening to the storm tear at their shelter, willing the walls to stand, the roof to hold, the foundation to remain true. At 11:47, something exploded in the basement. Not wind, not falling debris, a deep structural boom that vibrated through the floor beneath them, that made the windows rattle in their frames. Isla's engineer instinct screamed. Foundation failure, load-bearing wall collapse, critical systems compromised. She grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight Silas had brought over, told Wren to stay near the fire, descended the basement stairs with hands shaking. The beam cut through darkness thick enough to feel solid. Revealed stone walls, sweating moisture, dirt floor, uneven and strange. The old metal shelving unit had fallen, spilled its contents across the ground. Paint cans, rusted tools, rotted cardboard boxes scattered like shrapnel. But beyond the mess in the east corner where Isla's light wavered, something was different. Wrong. Changed. A section of brick wall, maybe 3 feet wide and 4 feet tall, had separated from the structure around it. Not collapsed, not damaged, but revealed as if something behind it had pushed through, or the mortar holding it had finally surrendered to time and pressure. Through the gap, Isla's flashlight caught emptiness, a void where solid wall should be. Her heart kicked against her ribs hard enough to hurt. She moved closer, careful on the uneven floor, aware she was alone in a basement during a storm, doing something probably stupid. The bricks came away easily. When she pulled them, mortar turned to dust, revealing more darkness behind. Within 10 minutes she'd created an opening large enough to fit through, and her light showed what time had hidden. A room. 6 by 8 feet, concrete lined, sealed against moisture. And in the center, a safe. Old industrial Mosler brand, 3 feet tall, covered in dust so thick it looked like gray fur. Isla's hands trembled as she climbed through the gap. The hidden room smelled different from the basement dryer, sealed like opening a time capsule. She approached the safe, tried the handle without expecting anything, nearly fell when it turned smoothly. The door swung open on hinges that barely squeaked, revealing contents that made no immediate sense. Stacks of paper bound with rubber bands that disintegrated at her touch, leather pouches that clinked when moved, a thick ledger with cracked leather binding, and a sealed envelope with handwriting across the front that stopped her breath. To my heir. Isla didn't take anything. Not yet. She photographed everything with her phone's camera, 15% battery and dropping, then carefully removed one leather pouch, one stack of papers, the ledger, the envelope, climbed back through the gap, climbed the basement stairs on legs that didn't feel quite solid. Wren still slept near the fire, peaceful and trusting. The storm still raged outside, wind and rain trying to tear the house apart. Isla set her discoveries on the kitchen table, sat in Beckett's chair and opened the leather pouch. Gold coins spilled across the wood, heavy and real and impossible. Dates stamped 1890s through 1920s, faces and eagles and denominations that meant nothing to Isla's engineer brain except value, except currency, except. Her grandfather had hidden actual gold in his basement and never told anyone. The papers were stock certificates, ornate and official. Rocky Mountain Mineral Consortium Incorporated. Class A common stock, certified to Beckett Thornton. Various dates between 1947 and 1963. Quantities ranging from 5,000 to 15,000 shares per certificate. Isla counted, recounted, arrived at a total that made her vision swim. 85,000 shares in a company she'd never heard of from an era before she was born, probably worthless now, but her grandfather had hidden them behind a brick wall for a reason. The ledger opened to pages of careful handwriting. Financial records spanning 1947 to 1982 investment amounts and dividend income and reinvestment purchases, all documented with the precision of someone who understood accounting. The final entry stopped Isla's breath. Total shares 85,000. Estimated value if company still operating $23 million. Do not tell family yet. Wait for the right time. Isla's phone battery was dying. She searched Rocky Mountain Mineral Consortium with shaking fingers, found no direct results but a Wikipedia entry for Summit Mining Holdings that mentioned the name in passing. Summit Mining Holdings was formed in 2015 from the restructuring of Continental Resources LLC, which itself was created from the 1989 merger of RMS Mining Corporation and Copper Valley Resources. RMS Mining Corporation was formed in 1968 from the merger of Rocky Mountain Mineral Consortium and Silver Peak Mining. The company still existed. Changed names, merged, restructured, but continuous operation across 77 years. Isla searched Summit Mining Holdings valuation, found an article from Forbes dated 3 months prior, estimating the private company's worth at $740 million. Her phone died before she could process the implications. Isla sat in darkness, lit only by the wood stove, gold coins gleaming on the table, stock certificates that might represent a fortune or nothing at all. Her dead grandfather's handwriting promising wealth that couldn't possibly be real. Outside, the storm that had revealed what time hid continued its assault, but Isla barely heard it anymore. The sealed envelope sat unopened in front of her, her name written in letters that had waited 15 years to be read. Somewhere in her chest, something that felt like hope was trying to unfold itself, despite every lesson experience had taught her about trusting and rescue. She opened the envelope with the care of someone defusing a bomb. The letter inside was dated March 1995, written in the same steady hand as the ledger entries. To whoever finds this, if you're reading these words, I'm gone and you found what I hid. I built that wall in 1975 after the lawsuit nearly destroyed me, after I learned that visible wealth makes you a target for everyone who thinks they deserve a piece of what you built. My brother tried to claim I owed him half of everything because family shares, because blood, because he needed it more than I did. The courts disagreed, but lawyers don't work for free. By the time I defended what was mine, I'd spent $200,000 proving my right to keep it, so I hid what remained. Not from paranoia, but from experience. I didn't tell your grandmother Margaret before she died in '72. Didn't tell your mother Linda when she inherited this house. The company was Rocky Mountain Mineral Consortium. 4 engineers with $12,000 and a dream back in '47. We found gold in Montana, real deposits, the kind that make men rich or dead depending on their luck. I kept my shares through good times and bad, through offers to buy me out, through mergers and name changes, and all the ways companies evolve while trying to stay alive. If you found this, you were desperate enough to search. That means you need it. And people who need are humble enough to use wealth wisely instead of letting it use them. The shares might be worthless now, the company long dead. But if they're not, if by some miracle the consortium survived, don't let money change who you are. It reveals character, doesn't create it. Use what you find to build something that matters. Becket Thornton. Isla read it 3 times, memorizing words that felt like permission and warning braided together. Dawn strengthened outside, turned the windows from black to gray. Wren would wake soon, need breakfast and normalcy, the routine that made childhood bearable, even when the adults were quietly falling apart. She sat motionless until the fire burned down to embers and first light crept through gaps in the curtains. The envelope remained in her hands, Beckett's handwriting patient as the dead. Her fingers traced the letters of her own name, feeling the indent where his pen had pressed into paper decades before she'd needed whatever message lay inside, before desperation had made her humble enough to see what was actually there instead of what she wanted to find. Isla spent the weekend moving through routines that felt surreal. She made breakfast for Wren from the last can of beans, watched her daughter build elaborate structures from pine cones and sticks on the porch, answered questions about when they could get a kitten with answers that felt like lies. The gold coins stayed locked in the safe, the stock certificates photographed and returned to their hiding place. Beckett's letter memorized until the words became a rhythm in her head. Don't let money change who you are. It reveals character, doesn't create it. Sunday evening after Wren fell asleep, Isla sat at the kitchen table with Silas's borrowed laptop and composed an email that took 40 minutes to write. Every sentence felt weighted with consequences. She couldn't predict every word, a potential door opening or slamming shut. Ms. Anderson, this is Isla Thornton. You helped me with my husband's estate in 2022. I apologize for contacting you out of nowhere, but I need advice about some documents I found in my grandfather's house. Stock certificates from 1947, very old. I don't know if they have any value, but I need an expert opinion. I can send photographs if that helps. I don't have money for legal fees right now, but if the certificates are worth anything, I can pay from that. Please let me know if you can help or who I should contact. She hit send before she could second-guess herself, then stared at the screen until her eyes burned. The response came 2 hours later while Isla was scrubbing dishes in water she'd heated on the wood stove. Isla, good to hear from you, though. I'm sorry circumstances sound difficult. Send me the photographs. I'll show them to a colleague who specializes in corporate securities. He'll be able to tell us if this is worth pursuing. No charge for initial consultation. Isla sent 20 images with shaking hands, high-resolution shots of certificates and ledger pages, and Beckett's letter evidence of a fortune that might be real or might be wishful thinking compressed into brittle paper and faded ink. Then she went to her Monday shift at the diner, served coffee and pancakes and eggs, over-easy smiled at regulars who tipped well-moved through hours on autopilot while her phone sat heavy in her pocket. Joelle Anderson called during Isla's break, her voice carrying excitement that professional restraint couldn't quite contain. Isla. I showed the photos to Sterling Hayes. He's a securities attorney who handles complex corporate cases. He says if these certificates are authentic, this could be extremely valuable. The break room tilted slightly. Isla sat down hard on a plastic chair. How valuable are we talking? Hundreds, thousands? Joelle paused, choosing words carefully. Sterling doesn't want to speculate until he's examined the physical documents and done research into the company's merger history. But Isla, if the shares converted properly through all the corporate changes, we're potentially talking about millions, maybe tens of millions. The number was too large to process. Isla heard herself asking questions about next steps, and when Sterling could visit and what documentation he'd need, her voice steady and professional, while her brain tried to wrap itself around the possibility that the safe in her basement might hold the solution to every problem she'd accumulated over the past 18 months. Sterling Hayes arrived Saturday morning in a 5-year-old sedan that suggested professional success without ostentation. Mid-40s with sharp eyes and the kind of calm that came from handling high-stakes negotiations regularly, wearing jeans and a casual jacket that made him unremarkable. He spent 3 hours at the kitchen table examining certificates with a jeweler's loupe and reference materials he'd brought in a leather briefcase. Isla made coffee, answered questions about Beckett's death and her inheritance of the property, explained her circumstances without going into detail about the Brennan family. The story she told was true but incomplete, all the facts and none of the feelings. Wren played outside, chasing the chickens Silas had brought over last week, oblivious to the examination happening at the table that might transform their lives into something unrecognizable. Sterling finally set down his loupe and pulled out a laptop, began typing notes and running calculations on a spreadsheet that filled with numbers Isla couldn't quite read from her angle across the table. Everything looks authentic. The paper stock is correct for the era. The printing method matches standards from the 40s through 60s. Beckett's signatures are consistent across all documents. He pulled up files, showed Isla merger documents and corporate filings he'd already researched. Now the complicated part is tracking what happened to these shares through multiple corporate transformations. 1947, Rocky Mountain Mineral Consortium Incorporated. 4 founding partners. Your grandfather held 85,000 shares, which was substantial ownership for a company that size. The numbers began to take shape on his screen, a trail through decades. 1968, first major merger with Silver Peak Mining created RMS Mining Corporation. The terms were 1.2 shares of RMS for each share of RMMC. So Beckett's 85,000 became 102,000. Sterling's fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. 1989 Second Merger, RMS, combined with Copper Valley Resources to form Continental Resources, LLC. Conversion rate was 0.85, so 102,000 became 86,700. Then, 2015. Continental restructured into Summit Mining Holdings, a private company. Conversion rate 1.5. Final count is 130,050 shares. The arithmetic felt abstract, disconnected from reality. Isla's engineering background made her good with numbers, but these calculations existed in a realm beyond her experience, quantities that had meaning on paper but no weight in her hands. What does that mean in actual value? Sterling pulled up a financial report, pointed to a valuation estimate that made Isla's breath catch. Summit Mining Holdings is privately held, no public stock price. But recent appraisals for financing purposes put the company's value at $740 million. They have approximately 515,000 total shares outstanding based on the documents I found. Your 130,050 shares represent 25.2% ownership. He typed the calculation, turned the laptop so Isla could see the result clearly. 25.2% of 740 million is 186.5 million. The kitchen went quiet except for chickens clucking outside and Wren's laughter carrying through the open window. Isla stared at the number on the screen. A figure so large it stopped having meaning, became abstract, like the distance to the moon expressed in inches. That can't be right. There has to be a mistake. Sterling's expression stayed neutral, professional, in a way that suggested he'd delivered shocking news before and knew how people reacted. There are several complicating factors. The 2015 restructuring required shareholders to re-register within 180 days, or their shares would be considered abandoned and revert to the company. Your grandfather died in 2009, so he couldn't re-register. The question is whether Montana law allows the company to claim abandonment without proper notification to the shareholder's address of record. He leaned back, fingers steepled. If they can legally claim abandonment, then the shares are worthless, already claimed by the company. But if they failed to properly notify, if they violated corporate law or their own bylaws, then your inheritance stands, and Summit Mining has to recognize your ownership. That's what I'll need to determine through research and then negotiation or litigation. Isla's hands felt cold despite the warmth from the wood stove. I can't afford a lawyer for something this complicated. I have $800 saved. I work on contingency for cases like this. 25% of whatever we recover. If we get nothing, you pay nothing except filing fees and costs, which I cover up front and deduct from any settlement. If we recover $100 million, I take $25 million and you keep $75. The math made sense even as the numbers remained unreal. And if Summit Mining refuses to recognize the shares, then we sue. Discovery depositions, potentially trial. Could take 2 years, cost hundreds of thousands in legal fees on their side. Considerable expense for us as well. Most companies prefer to settle rather than fight, especially when the law isn't clearly in their favor. Sterling's gaze held steady. But I need you to understand this is a gamble. We might win big or we might win nothing. There are no guarantees in litigation, especially against a corporation with deep pockets and experienced counsel. Isla looked out the window at Wren, 5 years old, and unaware her life might be about to change beyond recognition or stay exactly the same. The girl deserved security, stability, a childhood that didn't involve counting dollars to decide between food and heat. My daughter deserves to not wonder where her next meal comes from. If there's any chance these shares are legitimate, I have to try. Then I'll draft a letter to Summit Mining Holdings. Notify them of your claim request, verification of the share history. We'll see how they respond. The letter went out certified mail 3 days later, formal and precise, outlining Isla Thornton's inheritance and providing certificate numbers and Beckett's shareholder identification. Sterling had walked Isla through every paragraph, explaining the legal language and the strategic phrasing designed to establish her claim while leaving room for negotiation. Now came waiting days stretching into weeks while Isla maintained the routine that kept them fed and housed. She told no one about the discovery. Silas continued helping with repairs, asking occasionally how she was settling in, offering advice about winterizing for serious cold. His presence felt reassuring in its ordinariness, grandfatherly without expectation. But Isla noticed he changed the subject whenever Beckett's name came up in the context of mining or finances. Whatever history existed there, Silas clearly considered it closed territory. Wren's teacher sent home progress reports showing excellent work in reading, and math requested a parent conference that Isla attended during her lunch break. She heard nothing but praise for her daughter's adjustment and academic performance, and for 45 minutes she felt like a normal parent discussing normal things, not a woman waiting to learn if her grandfather's hidden fortune was real or fantasy. 3 weeks passed before Sterling called, his voice carrying a tension that made Isla's stomach drop. Summit Mining responded, "It's not good." She sat down at the kitchen table, phone pressed hard against her ear. "They reject the claim completely. Their legal department says they have no record of Beckett Thornton as a current shareholder. The 2015 restructuring required re-registration. No response was received, and therefore the shares reverted to the company per Montana corporate law and their bylaws. They consider the matter closed." The words landed like blows. Isla forced herself to breathe evenly, but they didn't notify him. He was dead. They claim they sent notices to all registered addresses. But here's the interesting part. They offered to buy the physical certificates from you for $5,000 as historical collectibles. The offer felt like an insult wrapped in condescension. $5,000 when the shares might be worth millions, when she'd spent months sleeping on floors and stretching cans of beans across days. That's nothing. Exactly. And it tells me they're worried. If they genuinely believed the shares were worthless, they wouldn't bother making any offer at all. The fact that they want the physical certificates suggests they're concerned about potential claims. So what do? We push back. I'm hiring a researcher to dig into their 2015 restructuring. Find out exactly who received notices, whether they followed proper legal procedure. Montana law requires companies to make reasonable efforts to notify all shareholders of major corporate actions. If they only notified active traders and ignored dormant accounts, they violated their fiduciary duty. 2 weeks of research produced results that turned Sterling's professional calm into something approaching enthusiasm. He drove to Bend again, spread documents across Isla's kitchen table like evidence at a trial, his movements quick and precise. They sent re-registration notices to 247 shareholders in 2015. But Summit Mining had 312 registered shareholders according to their own corporate records from 2014. 65 accounts received no notice whatsoever. Your grandfather was one of them. Isla studied the lists, saw the gaps where names should have been addresses that never received warnings about deadlines that would strip them of ownership. Why wouldn't they notify everyone? Because the 65 unnotified accounts were all dormant. No trading activity in over 5 years. Summit's management team had been trying to consolidate ownership, simplify their structure before a planned expansion. By claiming abandonment on inactive accounts, they could acquire those shares for themselves at drastically reduced prices. He showed her another document, internal company records obtained through public filing requirements. Look at this. After the restructuring, Summit's CEO and 3 executives purchased the abandoned shares at $10 per share. Market value at the time was approximately $1,200 per share. They bought 120,000 shares for $1.2 million when fair value was $144 million. The numbers were too large, too brazen. Isla's mind rejected the premise even as the documentation confirmed what shouldn't be possible. How is that legal? It's not. It's fraud. Securities fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, possibly criminal. But proving it requires documentation that they're not going to hand over willingly. I'm drafting a second letter much more aggressive. We'll threaten litigation, cite the notification failures, mention the other 64 shareholders they cheated. Let them know we're serious and informed. The second letter went out in December, 3 months after Isla had found the hidden room. Winter had settled over Central Oregon, brought snow that turned the farmhouse into something from a postcard, while making Isla's commute to the diner treacherous on roads that didn't get plowed until afternoon. She'd saved another $600, paid down more of the property tax debt, bought Wren winter clothes from the thrift store. Life had achieved a fragile equilibrium between survival and stability, and the possibility of wealth felt increasingly unreal, a story she'd told herself during one desperate night that daylight should have dissolved. Then Joelle called on a Friday afternoon, her voice tight with something between satisfaction and concern. Summit Mining's CEO contacted Sterling directly. Clayton Westwood. He wants to talk settlement. Isla's pulse kicked. That was fast, because they're panicking. Sterling did more research, found 41 of the other 65 families who were never notified. Some of the original shareholders died, but their heirs exist and they have the same claim you do. If this becomes a class action lawsuit, Summit Mining is looking at $300 million in legitimate claims plus punitive damages. Westwood wants to make a deal before this explodes into something that destroys the company. What kind of deal? He's proposing an internal audit. 4 weeks, hire PricewaterhouseCoopers to verify your share history and current valuation. If the audit confirms your claim is legitimate, they'll make a buyout offer. He emphasized they want to avoid litigation. Keep this quiet, resolve it fairly. Joelle's skepticism came through clearly, even over the phone. Sterling doesn't trust him. Westwood runs a company that deliberately cheated shareholders. His definition of fair might differ from ours. But the audit itself should be legitimate if it's truly independent. It's progress. We'll agree to the audit, see what they find, negotiate from there. The audit consumed January. Faceless accountants from PricewaterhouseCoopers requesting documents, interviewing Isla in conference calls that felt surreal, examining Beckett's certificates under laboratory conditions. Sterling handled most of the communication, shielding Isla from the process, while keeping her informed of progress through weekly emails that arrived like weather reports from a distant country. Week 1 verified the certificates were genuine. Paper and ink matched the era printing methods consistent with 1940s standards. Week 2 confirmed Beckett's shareholder account in Summit's archive records, found evidence he'd been sent dividend checks through the 1980s that stopped when he presumably lost interest or forgot about the holdings. Week 3 tracked the merger conversions, verified Sterling's calculations, confirmed the 130,050 shares as accurate. Week 4 produced the valuations Isla had been simultaneously dreading and hoping for. Sterling delivered the results in person on a Friday afternoon, his expression carefully neutral in a way that meant the news was significant. PricewaterhouseCoopers confirmed everything. You own 25.2% of Summit Mining Holdings. Current company valuation, $740 million. Your shares are worth $186.5 million. Isla stood at the kitchen counter, hands braced against the edge, breathing deliberately. The number had been theoretical before, a possibility floating in spreadsheets and legal arguments. Now it carried the weight of professional verification, accountants and auditors stamping their approval on a figure that could buy 1,000 houses like this one. You're telling me Beckett died believing he had maybe $2 or $3 million in a mining company that might not survive and actually had $186 million? Not exactly. In 1995, when he wrote that letter, the company was worth much less. The value increased dramatically over the past 30 years as Summit expanded operations, acquired new claims, benefited from rising commodity prices. Beckett couldn't have known what it would become. Sterling's tone stayed even factual. But he knew enough to hide it. He knew people would fight over it. That visible wealth attracts predators. Isla thought about Vivian Brennan, about Knox and Sloan, about how quickly family became enemies when money entered the equation. Beckett's caution no longer seemed paranoid, but prescient wisdom earned through experience she was only now beginning to understand. What happens now? Westwood wants to meet, discuss buyout terms. You could hold the shares, become a 25% owner, join the board, collect dividends. Or you could sell, take cash, walk away. Most people in your position choose cash. Less complicated, immediate, no ongoing obligations. Sterling pulled out his laptop, showed her financial projections. Fair market value is $186 million. But you're a single mother with no resources to fight a long legal battle, and they know it. First offer will probably be low, maybe $120 million, trying to lowball you into accepting less than you deserve. We counter at 160, settle around 140 to 155. The numbers had stopped having meaning weeks ago. 120 million was as incomprehensible as 186, both representing amounts of money Isla's brain couldn't convert into actual purchasing power or lifestyle implications. What would you recommend? Sterling's professionalism cracked slightly, showing genuine concern beneath. Honestly, take the cash. You want stability for your daughter, a chance to rebuild your life. Shares in a mining company tie you to volatile commodity markets. Board politics, management decisions you can't control. Cash gives you freedom. Isla looked around the farmhouse, thought about the work she and Silas had done to make it livable, the life they'd built from nothing over these months. Security mattered more than maximum return. Certainty more than potential upside. Okay, let's meet with Westwood. The conference call happened via video 3 days later. Sterling and Isla in his Portland office, Clayton Westwood and Summit Mining's legal team on the other end. Westwood was 60, silver-haired, projecting authority and controlled concern in equal measure. He opened with acknowledgement that Isla's claim was legitimate, that Summit took its obligations to shareholders seriously, that they wanted to resolve this amicably. Miss Thornton, your grandfather was one of our founding members. We have tremendous respect for his contributions to the company. At the same time, our company has operated for 77 years, created hundreds of jobs, generated billions in economic value. Sudden ownership claims from the past create instability that hurts everyone. Sterling's expression stayed neutral, revealing nothing. Mr. Westwood, the law is clear. Miss Thornton owns 25.2% of your company. You can recognize that fact willingly or through litigation, but the outcome is the same. I understand. That's why we'd like to make a buyout offer. $120 million cash transferred within 30 days of signing. In exchange, Miss Thornton releases all claims, signs a non-disclosure agreement, and we avoid the publicity and expense of a lawsuit. Isla felt the number land without impact, too large to register emotionally. Sterling leaned forward slightly, his movement economical. Your own audit values? Miss Thornton shares at 186 million. Why would she accept 66 million less? Westwood's expression hardened. The concerned grandfather replaced by the CEO who'd built a career on difficult negotiations. Because litigation could take 5 years. Legal fees would run into millions. There's no guarantee of victory despite what you think the law says. 120 million is immediate, certain life-changing money. Counteroffer. 155 million conditional on Summit proactively contacting the 41 other families who weren't notified in 2015, offering fair settlements. You resolve the entire problem, avoid class action exposure, clean up your shareholder records properly. Westwood conferred quietly with his legal team, voices muted, body language tense. 2 minutes passed before he unmuted the call. That's significantly higher than we hoped. But your point about the other shareholders is valid. If Miss Thornton agrees to help us identify those families and encourages them to settle rather than sue, we can accept 155 million. Contingent on signing within 14 days, non-disclosure agreement, mutual release of all claims. Isla's voice came out steadier than she felt. I need to think about this. It's not a decision I can make in the moment. Of course. Take the weekend. Westwood's tone shifted, became pointed. But Miss Thornton understands that this offer expires Monday. After that, we're prepared to fight in court for as long as it takes. The call ended. Sterling closed his laptop, looked at Isla with an expression mixing professional satisfaction and genuine concern for the human being sitting across from him. This is a good offer. Not perfect, but good. You'd net approximately 116 million after taxes and my fee. That's generational wealth security for Wren's entire life, resources to do anything you want. Isla watched traffic move through downtown Portland, people living normal lives where 6-figure problems were catastrophic and 8-figure solutions were fantasies that happened to other people in other places. What about the other families? The ones Summit cheated. If you accept, Westwood will be motivated to settle with them quickly and fairly. Your agreement puts pressure on him to clean up the entire mess. If you refuse and force litigation, He might fight everyone, drag it out for years. Sterling's silence was answer enough. So I helped the other victims by giving up $30 million of what's legally mine. Isla stood, moved to the window, imagined Wren's future laid out in possibilities that money could purchase or protect against. College without debt, health care without compromise, housing that didn't require duct tape and prayers. The ability to help others the way no one had helped them when Vivian put their belongings in garbage bags and closed the door. I'll take the deal. $155 million. But I wanted in writing that Summit contacts those other families within 90 days and makes legitimate offers. Not lowball insults. Fair settlements based on the audit methodology they used for my claim. I'll add that to the settlement terms. The paperwork arrived Tuesday. 60 pages of legal language that Sterling walked Isla through line by line, explaining release of claims and non-disclosure provisions and payment schedules and tax implications and verification of account information for wire transfer. She signed with a pen that felt too light for the weight of the commitment initialed. Every page watched her life change with strokes of ink across paper that would be filed away in archives and forgotten, while the money it represented transformed everything. The phone call came that evening, Vivian Brennan's voice after 6 months of silence cutting through Isla's fragile sense that maybe finally she was moving toward safety. Isla. I saw an article online about you and Summit Mining Holdings. A settlement for over $100 million. They didn't name you, but they mentioned a granddaughter of Beckett Thornton, and I know you inherited his house. The number's Isla. They're saying $155 million. Isla's hand tightened on the phone knuckles white. Where did you see that business journal? They do corporate filings coverage. I have alerts set for major settlements in the region. The lie was transparent. Vivian had been looking for Isla's name, searching for news, waiting for an opportunity to insert herself back into their lives. I signed a non-disclosure agreement. I can't discuss the settlement. Vivian's tone shifted, became the voice she'd used when Isla first moved into the Brennan house. Warm and concerned and completely artificial, a performance of grandmotherly care that made Isla's skin crawl. I'm calling because we need to talk about Wren. Cole's will specified that unexpected inheritances should be held in trust for her benefit. As her grandmother, I have legal standing to request oversight of those funds. The threat was clear, wrapped in concern for a child Vivian had shown no interest in for half a year. Cole's will addressed inheritances from the Brennan family. This money came from my family. It has nothing to do with Cole's estate. A judge might interpret it differently. I'm not trying to be difficult, Isla. I just want to make sure Wren's interests are protected. The word protected landed like a slap coming from the woman who'd put a 5-year-old's belongings in a trash bag and offered to keep the child while discarding the mother. You want to protect Wren now? After throwing us out? After not calling once in 6 months to check if your granddaughter was safe or fed or warm, you don't get to claim concern when money appears. Vivian, that's not protection. That's predation. Isla ended the call without waiting for a response, hands shaking with fury and fear mixing into something that tasted like bile. She contacted Joelle immediately, explained the situation through clenched teeth, asked what legal standing Vivian actually had. Joelle promised to research Montana law and Cole's will language and case precedent for grandparents claiming rights to inheritance. 24 hours later, she called back with news that was both reassuring and concerning. Vivian has minimal legal standing. Cole's will does mention inheritances, but the clause specifically says Brennan family estate. A good lawyer could argue he meant all inheritances, but it's a weak argument. However, family court judges are unpredictable when it comes to children's welfare. Vivian could file suit, drag you through months of hearings, create publicity and stress even if she ultimately loses. Joelle's experience with family law's ugly realities came through clearly. You could offer a settlement. Set up an education trust for Wren's substantial amount independent trustee so Vivian can't access it directly. Enough to make her feel like she won something structured so it actually benefits Wren. Most people take the money and drop the fight. Isla hated every word but couldn't argue with the logic. Fighting on principle cost time and emotional energy she didn't want to spend, and Wren deserved better than watching her mother battle her grandmother in court over money that should have been solving problems instead of creating them. She authorized Joelle to draft a settlement offer, $8 million, in an irrevocable trust for Wren's education and future needs, managed by a bank rather than family, with Vivian receiving $200,000 as a one-time payment to compensate for the inconvenience of not controlling her granddaughter's wealth. The calculation made Isla feel dirty, putting a price on peace, buying silence from someone who'd shown her cruelty when she needed kindness. Vivian accepted within 48 hours signed releases that forbid further claims against Isla's inheritance. They met once to finalize the paperwork at Joelle's office, with lawyers present to prevent the meeting from devolving into accusations and counter-accusations. Isla watched Vivian sign documents that bought her silence and wondered if this was how all family relationships ended when money entered the equation. If betrayal always came with a price tag and a notary's stamp. Vivian tried to speak as they prepared to leave, her voice carrying something that might have been genuine regret beneath layers of self-justification. "I'm sorry for how things ended. I was overwhelmed after Cole died. Having you there reminded me every day of what I'd lost. I handled it badly." Isla met her eyes, seeing a woman who'd chosen cruelty when strength was needed, who'd thrown away relationships for the temporary relief of not facing grief. "You're right. You handled it badly. Apologies don't erase 6 months of Wren asking why Grandma doesn't love us anymore. But I'm accepting this settlement because fighting you would hurt my daughter more than it would hurt you. She's suffered enough already." She picked up her bag, turned toward the door. "Take your $200,000. Stay away from us. If Wren wants a relationship with you when she's older, I won't stop her. But you'll have to earn that. Money won't buy it." They left separately, Isla walking into spring sunshine that felt thin and unconvincing. She climbed into the truck Silas had finally agreed to sell her for fair value once she'd explained she'd received a small inheritance, enough to make the farmhouse livable and buy reliable transportation. The lie sat bitter but necessary, another layer of protection against the scrutiny wealth invited. She drove back to Bend, to the farmhouse that was home despite its age, and Quirks found Wren playing in the yard with the chickens. Isla joined her daughter in the dirt, and Feathers knelt in mud that would stain her jeans, didn't mention that they'd just guaranteed Wren access to college funds that would make Ivy League tuition look like pocket change. That night, after Wren fell asleep, Isla descended the basement stairs for the first time since the storm. The hidden room remained sealed behind its brick wall, the safe inside untouched, since she'd removed the documents months ago. She didn't open it, didn't need to verify the empty space where wealth had waited. Instead, she stood in the darkness, thinking about inheritance and what actually mattered about money as tool versus identity, about the difference between having resources and being defined by them. Upstairs, Wren dreamed whatever 5-year-old's dream, protected by wealth she didn't know existed, growing up in a house that had sheltered desperation and transformed it into security without requiring them to become different people in the process. The foundation held the walls, stood the roof, kept out rain. Beneath it all, in the place where secrets had hidden, there was nothing left but space and the memory of what had been found when storms revealed what time had concealed. That seemed right, somehow seemed like the proper end to one chapter and the beginning of whatever came next. Beckett had gambled 77 years ago, trusted that Earth held wealth for those patient and desperate enough to extract it. Now Isla held the fruits of that gamble in bank accounts and legal documents, and the real question wasn't how much she had, but what she would build with it. 60 days after signing papers that changed everything, Isla received a bank email with a subject line flagged for security review. She opened it, standing in the farmhouse kitchen on a Thursday morning in late March, coffee growing cold in her hand, and read the balance notification 3 times before her brain accepted the reality that numbers on a screen could represent actual purchasing power. $155 million had arrived overnight, transforming theoretical wealth into something concrete enough to withdraw or spend or invest or waste. The taxes took $57 million immediately, federal and state combining to claim their share of fortune that had existed hidden for decades. Sterling's contingency fee absorbed another $20 million earned through months of research and negotiation that had turned possibility into reality. Legal costs and accounting fees took $400,000 more the infrastructure of wealth extraction. The final transfer to Isla's new investment account managed by advisors Joelle had recommended totaled $77.6 million. Even after the deductions, even after understanding that 40% of theoretical wealth had evaporated into government coffers and professional services, the number remained absurd. Isla sat at the table where Beckett's letter had promised this possibility, where stock certificates had revealed what time had hidden, tried to feel something proportional to what had happened. Relief seemed inadequate. Joy felt wrong when the money came from her grandfather's fear of his own family. Gratitude mixed with grief for a man who died never knowing his careful hiding had worked, never learning his granddaughter would be the desperate person humble enough to find it. Wren came home from school showing a drawing of their house with chickens in the yard and smoke from the chimney colors bright and optimistic in ways only children could manage. "Can we get a goat now that we have a real home?" Isla said, maybe thinking about how to explain to a 6-year-old that they had enough money to buy 1,000 goats, trying to find language for wealth that wouldn't corrupt the childhood she was working so hard to preserve as normal. Silas stopped by that evening with materials for replacing the last broken windows, found Isla distracted and distant, staring at nothing while her hands moved through the motions of preparing dinner. He asked if everything was okay, genuine concern creasing his weathered face, and Isla almost told him. Almost let the secret out, almost shared the burden of sudden wealth with someone who'd been there during the worst of it. But Beckett's letter echoed in her mind about how money changed people, revealed character, made targets of those who possessed it. "Everything's fine, just tired. Long week at the diner." The lie tasted bitter but necessary. "I'll see you Saturday morning. We can tackle those windows together." Life continued in its established patterns, even as the foundation had shifted beneath it. Isla still worked at Frank's Diner 3 days a week, serving breakfast to regulars who had no idea the waitress refilling their coffee could buy the building outright without feeling the expense. She still shopped carefully, comparing prices and choosing generic brands, habits too ingrained to break overnight. Still drove the truck she'd bought from Silas, still heated the house with the wood stove, even though she could afford to install central heating or buy a new house entirely. Some of it was caution, not wanting to draw attention, until she understood how to navigate wealth without becoming a spectacle. But more of it was honesty. Isla testing herself against Beckett's warning, seeing if money would change who she was, or simply reveal character that had always existed beneath circumstances. The woman who'd counted $43 on a Portland sidewalk hadn't been greedy or cruel or wasteful. The question was whether having millions would corrupt those qualities or just give them larger canvas. 6 months after the money arrived, Isla started sleeping poorly, waking at 3 a.m. with her heart racing and her breath shallow, unable to identify what had triggered the panic. She'd startle at unexpected sounds, jump when Wren came up behind her, too quietly feel her chest tighten for no reason she could name. The attacks happened randomly, divorced from obvious cause, and she told herself it was nothing. Stress from adjusting to new circumstances. Exhaustion, catching up after months of running on empty. But the panic didn't fade. It intensified. Teeth started showing up during normal activities like grocery shopping or watching Wren play. Isla would be standing in the produce aisle and suddenly couldn't breathe, or sitting on the porch and feeling like the sky was pressing down, weight crushing her lungs. She mentioned it to Joelle during a foundation planning meeting, tried to make it sound casual, just wondering if this was normal after sudden life changes. Joelle looked at her for a long moment, lawyer's assessment giving way to genuine concern. "Have you talked to anyone?" "A therapist. I don't need therapy. Everything's fine now. We're safe." Trauma doesn't disappear because circumstances improve, Isla. Sometimes safety is what lets your body finally acknowledge what it suppressed during crisis. Joelle wrote down a name and number on her business card. Dr. Helena March. She's a trauma specialist in Bend, works with people who've been through sudden life changes or domestic situations. Just talk to her once, see if it helps. The first session felt like exposure. Isla resisting the impulse to perform competence to demonstrate she had everything handled despite evidence to the contrary. Dr. March listened while Isla described Cole's death and the Brennan family's slow-motion betrayal and the months of survival mode where every decision carried life or death weight. Then the whiplash of sudden wealth that should have solved everything but somehow made the unprocessed grief and fear more acute brought them forward instead of erasing them. You spent 18 months in survival mode where breaking down wasn't an option. When did you actually process losing your husband? Being abandoned by his family? The question cut through Isla's careful defenses. I didn't. There wasn't time. Dr. March's expression stayed neutral, kind, without being soft. There's time now. That's what the panic attacks are telling you. Your body is trying to process what your mind couldn't handle when it was happening. The therapy took 2 years. Sessions where Isla cried more than she'd allowed herself during the actual crisis, where she articulated rage at Vivian and grief for Cole, and bone-deep fear that wealth would vanish as suddenly as it had appeared. Dr. March taught breathing techniques and somatic exercises and cognitive reframing, all the tools people who'd never been desperate might dismiss as self-help nonsense, but which actually helped when applied with discipline. Isla learned that healing wasn't linear, that she could be grateful for rescue while still furious about needing it. The anger at Vivian proved most complicated to unravel. Layers of betrayal and abandonment wound so tightly around each other that separating them felt impossible. She forgave you nothing, but you can choose to release the anger anyway. Not for her, for yourself, because carrying it is poisoning you more than it's hurting her. The concept felt revolutionary and obvious simultaneously. While the therapy sessions chipped away at internal damage, Isla began building external structures that would outlast her lifetime. The Becket Thornton Foundation, incorporated in August 2024, dedicated to supporting single mothers facing homelessness. The mission statement was simple: offer what no one had offered Isla. Actual help instead of judgment, resources instead of sermons about personal responsibility. The initial endowment of $15 million produced investment income around $1.2 million annually, enough to fund programs Isla designed based on her own experience of what desperation actually required. Emergency housing grants covered security deposits and first month's rent with no questions beyond verified need. Legal aid connected women to attorneys who understood that escaping bad situations required paperwork and representation most couldn't afford. Job training partnered with Central Oregon Community College, taught trades that paid living wages. Child care support made attending training possible. Isla hired a director to run day-to-day operations, stayed involved in program design and funding decisions, but avoided making the foundation about herself. The name honored Becket, acknowledged where the money originated, but the work focused on present need rather than past circumstances. The first year helped 127 families, modest numbers that felt more meaningful than the dollar amounts generating them, each application carrying echoes of Isla's own story. Women fleeing abuse or abandonment, or simple bad luck children who needed stability more than explanations of why their world had collapsed. Petra Thompson's application arrived in October, 6 months into the foundation's operation. 34 years old, 2 kids living in her car after her husband's death from pancreatic cancer left her with medical debt that consumed their savings and destroyed her credit. Something in the spare language describing her situation made Isla request a meeting, see the woman behind the paperwork. They sat in the foundation's small office, converted from a barn on the farmhouse property, while Petra's children played in the yard under Silas's supervision. His grandfatherly patience seemed endless ability to occupy children with simple tasks, a gift Isla didn't take for granted. Petra's hands shook holding the coffee Isla had poured, exhaustion written into every line of her posture, the particular fatigue that came from fighting too long with too little. I don't know why I'm here. I don't take charity, but my kids need a place to sleep that isn't the back seat, and I can't get approved for an apartment without first and last month's rent I don't have. Isla saw herself in March 2023 staring at $43 while calculating survival in units too small to matter. This isn't charity, it's support while you rebuild. Her voice stayed steady, matter of fact. The foundation will cover your security deposit and 2 months' rent. We'll connect you with legal aid to handle the medical debt, workout payment plans, or bankruptcy if that's appropriate. We have child care grants so you can attend job training if you want to pursue a new career or upgrade your skills. Petra's facade cracked, tears cutting tracks through makeup applied to hide exhaustion. Why would you do this? You don't know me. Because I lived in my car too. Different reasons, same fear. Someone helped me when I had nothing. Now I help others. That's how this works. The foundation placed Petra in a 2-bedroom apartment by November, enrolled her in medical coding training by December, provided 6 months of child care support while she completed certification. Isla tracked her progress with the intensity of someone personally invested in the outcome, checking in monthly, offering encouragement when the coursework got difficult. 1 year later, Petra sent a card. Job secured $42,000 annually, with benefit stability for the first time since her husband died. The gratitude expressed couldn't capture what the help had meant, but Isla understood anyway. She remembered what rescue felt like when you'd stopped believing it was possible. Stories like Petra's, accumulated through the first 3 years, became the foundation's actual currency beyond dollars distributed. The second year brought expansion programs for formerly incarcerated mothers trying to reunify with children, partnerships with employers willing to hire women with gaps in work history. Year 3 added mental health counseling, recognizing that trauma didn't disappear when housing stabilized, that healing required more than a roof and income. The numbers grew. 300 families year, 2, 500 year, 3 success rates, holding steady at 73%, maintaining housing stability after 12 months. Evidence that the model worked, that combining immediate crisis assistance with long-term support produced outcomes that justified the investment. 3 years after the settlement, Wren came home from school asking questions that caught Isla unprepared. 9 years old now, perceptive in ways that made conversations both easier and harder simultaneously. Why don't I ever see Uncle Knox or Aunt Sloan anymore? Isla had been preparing for this conversation, discussed it with Dr. March during therapy, but preparation didn't make the words easier to find. When Daddy died, his family had trouble dealing with their grief. They treated us in ways that weren't kind. I've forgiven them, but forgiveness doesn't mean pretending everything's fine or putting ourselves in situations where we might get hurt again. Wren processed this with the seriousness she applied to difficult concepts, the same focus she brought to math homework or science projects. Did they not want me? The question landed like a punch, direct and devastating in its simplicity. They loved you. They just didn't know how to love us both at the same time. They made choices that hurt us. But if you want to see them, I won't stop you. That's your decision to make. Do you want me to see them? Isla chose honesty over comfort, the harder path that respected her daughter's intelligence. I want you to have family who loves you well. If they can be that, yes. We'll figure it out together. 3 months later, Isla contacted Knox, the least hostile of Cole's siblings, the one most likely to have actually done the work of confronting his own demons. She proposed meeting for lunch in Portland neutral ground where either of them could leave if things got difficult. Knox arrived looking older than his 43 years, carrying weight in his face that suggested intervening time hadn't been kind. They ordered sandwiches, neither ate much of small talk about weather and traffic, feeling forced, until Knox finally addressed what mattered. I owe you an apology for how we treated you, for supporting Mom when she kicked you out. We were drowning in our own problems and took it out on you instead of dealing with our own shit. Isla appreciated the admission without fully trusting it, years of experience teaching her that words came cheap. Apologies matter when they come with changed behavior. Are you different now? Knox's laugh carried bitterness earned through hard experience. I've had therapy, lost another job, hit bottom hard enough to crack some things open. Dealt with my anger issues, found new work, been stable for 2 years. Can't undo what I did. Can only try to be better going forward. Maya asked about you. She wants to know her father's family. I won't deny her that unless you're going to hurt her. I won't. Knox's voice stayed quiet, certain. Can't speak for Mom or Sloan, but I'd like to see Wren if you'll allow it. They established cautious contact. Supervised visits initially, Isla present to ensure Wren's emotional safety. Watching interactions with the wariness of someone who'd learned trust was earned slowly. Knox showed up consistently over months, brought age-appropriate gifts without trying to buy affection, asked about Wren's interests, rather than making everything about himself or the past. The relationship built slowly, never reaching close but achieving functional, a careful middle ground where people who'd caused harm tried to do better. Vivian sent birthday cards each year, signatures that said simply, "Love Grandma Vivian," without further explanation or invitation. Sloane remained absent entirely, her silence its own kind of answer. Isla accepted these patterns as information about who people were, built her life around those willing to show up rather than waiting for those who wouldn't. Silas died 3 years after the settlement, 80 years old, his funeral drawing a crowd that testified to decades of quiet service to the Bend community. Isla spoke briefly at the service, talked about a man who'd fixed her well pump and refused payment, who'd taught her carpentry, and never asked invasive questions, who'd embodied a kind of practical kindness that expected nothing in return. Marin followed him 6 months later, the kind of death people called peaceful, when they meant someone had given up after losing their partner. Isla missed them both with an ache that time didn't diminish. Missed Silas's steady presence during those early months when survival seemed impossible, the way he'd appeared with tools and materials and expertise exactly when needed. Missed the way they'd helped without making helping feel like debt or obligation or charity that came with strings. She established a scholarship in their names funding tuition for students pursuing skilled trades, honoring the practical wisdom Silas had embodied. Over the years, the scholarship would fund 83 students, sending carpenters and electricians and plumbers into the world carrying skills that couldn't be outsourced or automated. 5 years after finding the hidden room, the foundation celebrated milestones that felt both significant and insufficient. 1,847 families assisted, 73% maintaining stability 1 year later, expansion to 3 additional Oregon counties. The numbers represented success by any metric, but Isla studied the 490 families who hadn't stayed stable with the same intensity she brought to the successes. Money solved some problems instantly and others not at all. Learning to distinguish between them required constant recalibration. Wren at 10 showed disturbing signs of understanding exactly how different their life was from most people's, coming home from school with questions that revealed her growing awareness of wealth's implications. Why don't we live in a big house like Emma's family? Isla sat with her daughter in the renovated farmhouse that remained modest despite wealth that could have transformed it. We have enough money that I could buy a mansion tomorrow, but houses don't make families happy. Purpose makes people happy. We live here because Great-Grandpa Beckett built something good, and I want to honor that by not wasting what he left us. Having money means we get to help other families who are scared and struggling like we were. Is that why you started the foundation? I started it to help people the way I wish someone had helped us, without conditions or judgment, just genuine support until they can stand on their own. But we had nothing, and now we have everything. How did that happen? Isla had been preparing for this conversation since the day money arrived. Great-Grandpa Beckett invested in a mining company a long time ago. When he died, nobody knew about it because he'd hidden the papers. I found them when the storm knocked down that wall in the basement. The company was worth a lot of money. She paused, choosing words carefully. But the important part isn't how much we have. It's what we do with it. Wren processed this with gravity beyond her years. Did the money make us different people? The question cut straight to everything Isla had been wrestling with since opening Beckett's safe. No, it revealed who we already were. We were brave when we had $43. Now we're brave with millions. The number changed, but we didn't. That's what Great-Grandpa Beckett wanted. Why he hid the money instead of spending it. He understood that wealth tests character instead of creating it. The foundation continued expanding through years 6 and 7. Collaboration with other organizations replicating the model beyond Central Oregon. Year 8 brought scholarship programs for children of assisted families. Recognition that helping mothers meant investing in their children's futures, too. By year 10, the foundation operated in 6 counties across Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, partnerships with 12 employers committed to hiring program graduates, annual budgets exceeding $5 million as additional donors joined the cause. Wren grew alongside the work, volunteering at the foundation office during summers, understanding from observation what wealth meant when deployed with purpose versus consumed for comfort. She saw her mother work 3 days weekly at Frank's Diner long after financial necessity ended, understood that some things mattered more than money could measure. Isla returned to engineering part-time when Wren entered middle school, consulting on historic preservation projects, applying expertise to keeping old buildings standing through methods that respected their history instead of erasing it. The work felt appropriate echoes of what she'd done with her own life, taking something damaged and making it functional without destroying its character. Wren graduated high school with honors, accepted admission to Oregon State to study environmental science, moved to campus while maintaining weekend foundation involvement. Isla felt the absence acutely, the farmhouse too quiet without her daughter's presence, but recognized this as healthy separation, the necessary process of launching children into independence. Sophomore year brought a phone call from Wren, her voice carrying urgency that made Isla immediately attentive. "Mom, I want to expand the foundation, add programs specifically for college students. I've been researching. There are thousands of students who could finish their degrees if they just had help with housing or childcare or emergency funds when unexpected expenses hit. We have resources. We should use them." Isla smiled at the phone, recognizing her own intensity, reflected back the same drive to solve problems that had carried her through engineering school and impossible circumstances. "Write me a proposal. Show me the research, the budget projections, how it would integrate with existing programs. If it makes sense, we'll do it." Wren submitted a 20-page proposal within 2 weeks, comprehensive and well-reasoned, demonstrating analytical thinking that made Isla proud in ways that had nothing to do with money. The Foundation Board approved the College Assistance Program, unanimously launched it the following fall. The program helped 115 students in the first year complete degrees they'd been forced to abandon due to financial crisis, proving the model's viability. The years accumulated, transforming Isla from the desperate woman who'd counted $43 on a Portland sidewalk into someone whose life had achieved contours she could never have imagined that night. The foundation's impact expanded beyond what initial endowment could have predicted, attracting additional funding from donors, inspired by the model, growing to serve 1,200 families annually with success rates that justified continued investment. 25 years after the November storm that knocked down a basement wall and revealed what time had hidden, Isla stood in the farmhouse kitchen on a cold morning, watching Wren introduce her daughter to the house where 3 generations of Thornton women had learned that survival required more than money could buy. Little Ember was 5 years old, named after her great-great-grandmother, Margaret Beckett's wife, who'd died before Isla was born. She peppered Wren with questions about everything: why the chickens were named after gemstones, whether the farmhouse was haunted, what the glass room in the basement contained. Wren answered with patient thoroughness, kneeling to her daughter's level, the way Isla had once knelt to explain adventures, when there was only fear explaining complicated history in language a 5-year-old could process. Isla watched from the doorway, coffee growing cold in her hands, seeing her own fierce protectiveness reflected in the way Wren responded to Ember's curiosity. Some things passed through generations unchanged, carried in bone and blood, and the muscle memory of protecting small lives against large worlds. They descended to the basement together. 3 generations moving through space that had witnessed transformation stood before the glass wall that preserved the hidden room as memorial. Isla had commissioned the glass enclosure years ago, wanting to honor what the room had been while preventing it from becoming something else: shrine or museum or tourist attraction. Ember pressed her face against the glass, studying the empty safe with intensity children brought to things adults had learned to overlook. "Mommy, what's this room for?" Wren crouched beside her daughter, one hand on the glass separating them from the space that had changed everything. "This is where great-great-grandpa Beckett hid something very important, papers that showed he owned part of a mining company. When he died, nobody knew about these papers. Grandma Isla found them during a storm, and that discovery helped our whole family." "Why did he hide them?" Isla spoke before Wren could answer, moving to join them at the glass barrier. "Because he learned that when people know you have money, they treat you differently. Sometimes they become jealous. Sometimes they think they deserve what you have. He wanted whoever found this to need it badly enough that having it wouldn't corrupt them, wouldn't turn them into someone greedy or cruel. He was protecting not just the money, but the person who would eventually inherit it. Ember processed this with the seriousness that ran through Thornton women like genetic code, the same gravity Isla had brought to engineering problems and Wren had applied to environmental science. Did it corrupt you, Grandma? The question was so direct, so clear-eyed that Isla had to suppress a smile at its precision. I hope not. I try every day to use the money the way Great-Grandpa Beckett would have wanted, to help people who need help, to raise your mother to understand that wealth is responsibility, not just comfort, to make sure our family remembers where we came from even when we don't have to live that way anymore. Wren added her hand to the glass beside Ember's 3 generations connected through barrier and memory, through the weight of choices made decades apart. The money didn't make us better people, sweetheart. It revealed who we already were. Grandma was brave and resourceful when we had nothing. The money just gave her resources to be brave on a bigger scale, to help thousands of families instead of just our own. Ember nodded, apparently satisfied with answers that would take years to fully understand, then pivoted with the lightning transitions unique to 5-year-olds. Can we feed the chickens now? They climbed back to daylight, Isla moving slower than the other 2, her knees protesting stairs in ways they hadn't when she'd first descended to that basement during the storm 25 years ago. Wren noticed, slowed her pace without making it obvious, offered an arm that Isla waved away with more pride than wisdom. They emerged into afternoon sun that turned the farmhouse golden, illuminated the careful restoration that had preserved Beckett's original vision while making the structure sound enough to last another 70 years. The work had been done slowly over decades. Isla refusing to rush transformation, insisting on methods that honored what had been while securing what would be. Ember raced toward the chicken coop, Wren following at the measured pace of mothers everywhere trying to prevent children from injuring themselves through enthusiasm. Isla remained on the porch watching them move through the yard, seeing in their interaction echoes of herself and Wren during those early months when survival had meant making games of poverty, when love had been the only resource they'd had in abundance. The chickens scattered and regrouped as Ember shrieked with delight, scattering feed with wild abandon, while Wren tried to teach proper technique. The coop still stood sturdy, Silas's construction having outlasted his life testament to the kind of work people did when they built things meant to endure rather than simply meet minimum requirements. The foundation had evolved beyond anything Isla had initially envisioned. Wren's leadership brought innovation and energy that complemented Isla's careful caution, willingness to experiment with new approaches while maintaining core principles. Programs now operated in 6 counties had expanded to Washington and Idaho, through partnership agreements helped an average of 1,200 families annually with success rates that remained high. The work would continue after Isla's death, structured to survive transitions of leadership funded beyond any single person's lifetime. Wren's husband called, saying he'd started dinner, they should head home soon. Goodbyes were negotiated with Ember, who wanted 5 more minutes that became 10, then 15, before finally accepting that leaving was inevitable. She hugged Isla with the fierce intensity of the very young, all sharp elbows and bony shoulders, and Isla held her granddaughter, thinking about continuity, about the way lives connected across decades, through more than genetics, through shared experience of hardship, overcome, and values transmitted not through lecture, but through example. I love you, Grandma. Thank you for showing me the secret room. I love you too, sweetheart. Come back soon. They drove away, taillights disappearing down the dirt road that led to the highway to Portland, to lives that would unfold in ways Isla couldn't predict or control. She remained on the porch until the lights vanished completely, then moved inside where the farmhouse wrapped around her like a familiar coat, walls holding 25 years of transformation without losing the shape Beckett had built. The basement door stood closed. Isla felt no need to descend one more time to the glass-enclosed memorial. That room had already given everything it had to offer, revealed its secret when desperation made her humble enough to search. Now it existed as reminder rather than repository, teaching tool rather than treasure vault. She made tea at the kitchen table where stock certificates had first spilled their impossible promise, where she'd read Beckett's letter about wealth revealing character instead of creating it. The words had proven true in ways she couldn't have predicted that storm-torn November night, not because the money had transformed her into someone better, but because having it had simply given her larger canvas to paint the same values she'd carried when counting $43 on a Portland sidewalk. Wren would continue the Foundation's work with the same fierce intentionality she brought to everything would raise Ember to understand that inheritance meant transmitting principles across generations, not just transferring wealth. The chain would hold or break based on choices Isla couldn't control, but she'd done her part. Proven Beckett's gamble demonstrated that finding fortune when you needed it most didn't necessarily corrupt if you'd already been tested by having nothing and discovered you were enough. Outside darkness settled over land that had sheltered desperation and witnessed recovery over the chicken coop still standing sturdy over the Foundation's barn office where tomorrow's work waited. The basement held its empty safe behind glass monument to what storms could reveal when time finally surrendered its secrets. Upstairs, Isla climbed into bed thinking not about the wealth that had changed everything, but about the strength that had made the wealth possible. The resilience discovered on a sidewalk with a 5-year-old daughter and 3 garbage bags the character Beckett had trusted would be there when someone desperate finally found what he had hidden. She closed her eyes, the farmhouse creaking its familiar evening song around her, and slept the sleep of someone who'd survived her worst day and learned that survival itself was wealth no fortune could purchase.